You can be seated. At this time, we have an opportunity for the younger ones among us, preschool at about age 3 all the way through 6th grade. You can go right now, if you want, with Miss Rebecca for a special message at Grace Place Kids. Yeah, right there. It's always a good time. They have a video. They have a lot of fun. I can't go this time. I have to preach. Can you go with Miss Rebecca? No, that's okay, too. And you don't have to go. Sometimes they don't. So as they get ready to head on out to Grace Place Kids, we have a lesson that comes from Mark. This is our reading for the day. Again, the very first Sunday in the church here, and so we have a story about the end at the beginning. Jesus said, "In those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. They will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as a branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all of these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away." Here ends the reading. So when I grew up a little bit in Florida and then a little bit in kind of rural Indiana, way out in the country, not near any major cities. And when I was there in my elementary and early middle school days, I had a really close friend. His name was Corey. And Corey had a house way out in the country, way away from just about everything. And I would go there just about every weekend, lots of times during the week, spend lots of time out there. And we'd go running around in fields and in rivers and little creeks and all sorts of fun things that were back there. Corey and I were very close. He was probably my best friend through that period of my life. And Corey was very open and very kind of brash about being a Christian. That was very important to who he was. And I went to church every Sunday as I was growing up. But it was very clear early on in our friendship that what it meant to be a Christian was maybe just a little bit different for him than it was for me at that time in my life. You see, Corey would talk on and on about things like angels and demons and the rapture and the end of the world and all of these things. And I thought they were pretty interesting because in my church they never said any of those things. He had all of these stories about what might happen at the end of the world, what the Bible said, where angels and demons were at work right now doing all of these things. And it probably helped him a little bit that around that time there's a very famous book series called the Left Behind series. It's talking about the end of the world, and there have been movies and books and a whole bunch of things, but you can imagine a little bit what they are just from the one like scene in the trailer I saw, that the rapture happens and all of the elect are swooped up into heaven, and then there are jumbo jets falling from the sky because the pilots got raptured, and there's all of this chaos in the world. And I would listen to him talk about those things, and I thought they were kind of interesting, but I wasn't really sure what to do with any of them. My church never talked about that stuff. I didn't know, did that make sense? Was it really in the Bible? Is it what I should believe? I wasn't ever really sure. And I can remember one Sunday he invited me to go to his church with him. I usually went to my own church where my dad was preaching, but I went one Sunday with him, and it was a really different experience than what I was used to. There were people there who were praying in tongues, which sounds really, really weird if you've never heard it before. There were people talking about visions, and they talked again about the rapture, about the end of the world, and how they could tell that we were living in the end of days, that Jesus was definitely coming soon. And you can say whatever you like about groups like that. We don't typically talk about a lot of that stuff here at Grace, but there's something that they're doing that's very ancient and very traditional in terms of being a Christian. You see, the story that I read today, it's in the Gospel of Mark. That was one of the earliest Gospels written down, probably about 40 or so years after Jesus had died and risen again. And so you can imagine 40 years after Jesus, the people who had actually seen Jesus or known the disciples, they're getting old. Some of them are starting to die. And the whole early church has to figure out, Jesus promised he was going to come back, but all of his friends are starting to die. And what does that mean? Nobody really knew. And so as they're writing down this collection of stories of Jesus, of what he'd done, they put this bit into it where Jesus talks about, here's how you're going to know that I'm on my way back. Here's how you're going to know that something big is happening, that I'm going to come back and the world is going to be totally different. And for generation after generation, Christians have heard those words, they've read them in the Bible, and they've tried to figure out and look around them and see if God might be coming back. And generation after generation, everybody has been pretty well certain that it's going to happen soon. We've got 2,000 years of Christians saying, this thing is going to happen soon. That's a tricky thing to kind of reconcile, because obviously the first ones weren't very right. At least it doesn't seem like it. Well, I can remember after going to church with Corey for the first time, after we got back, it was all very different, and I remember just having one question about what they were talking about, and I said to my friend Corey, what happens after the rapture? After all of that's done, what's next? What happens after that? And I didn't get an answer. He said, I don't think I know. And I asked his mom, who had been the one who had kind of taken him to church and was the matriarch of the family. And I think she gave me a little more of an answer, but there was nothing in it that I could really grab onto, at least not as a sixth grader, that says, yeah, that's what happens. I understand it now. In fact, that question I never really got answered ever until probably about 6 years ago. 6 years ago, I happened to meet an Irish storyteller. His name is Peter Rollins, or just Pete. And Pete was coming to the church I was at, and he was working on a book of stories. And the stories that he tells are always very interesting. They're stories that have to do sometimes with things in the Bible, sometimes just with theology or about God. And they always have a twist in them. And he told, when I was there, he told this story of the rapture, of the end of times. And I want to share a little bit of that story with you now. I actually have it on video, and it's really, really neat. He tells it in a really special way. So I hope we can switch to the next slide and see what we got here.
The time has now come for me to separate the sheep from the goats, the healthy wheat from the inedible chaff. Having spoken these words, God slowly turned to face the world and called forth to the church with a booming voice. Rise up and ascend to heaven, all you who have sought to escape the horrors of this world by sheltering beneath my wing. Come to me, all who have turned from this suffering world, by calling out, Lord, Lord. In an instant, millions were caught up in the clouds and ascended into the heavenly realm, leaving the suffering world behind them. Once this great rapture had taken place, God paused for a moment and then addressed the angels, saying, It is done. I have separated the people born of my Spirit from those who have turned from me. It is time now for us to leave this place and take up residence in the earth. For it is there that we shall find our people, the ones who would forsake heaven in order to embrace the earth, the few who would turn away from eternity itself to serve at the feet of a fragile, broken life that passes from existence in but an instant. And so it was that God and the heavenly host left that place to dwell among those who had rooted themselves upon the earth, quietly supporting the ones who had forsaken God for the world, and thus who bore the very mark of God, the few who had discovered heaven in the very act of forsaking it.
So that was the story that Pete told that day, and I love that story, not necessarily because I think that's like factually correct what's going to happen, but because he does such a good job of putting in that twist that seems to happen with so many of the Bible stories. And in the Bible, whenever there's an ending, whenever there's something catastrophic that happens, it's almost expected. But the unexpected thing is always what happens next, that new thing that's coming through. That's what gets everybody up in arms. That's what's radical about God. It's those new things that really change the world. And as you can imagine, Pete put this out on the internet and all over the place, and there are a lot of folks that really, really disagree with it. They don't like it. When I downloaded this video, I went to YouTube and I looked through some of the comments, which is a horrible idea. I never do that. But I looked through some of the comments, and there were just paragraphs after paragraphs of people saying, that is absolutely wrong. That doesn't make any sense. It's not biblical. It's not correct. It's heresy. It's everything under the sun. But I think that's what I love about it. It's got that radical twist. It's that unexpected piece of something new happening. I think that's the way God works. If you look in the Bible, you can see that happening kind of again and again. If you look at the story of, even in the Old Testament, Noah and the flood. God destroying the world wasn't really a surprise in the story, but the fact that God saved this one family and started something new and made this promise never to destroy the world again, that's the radical, powerful part of the story. When we get into the New Testament with Jesus, it's not a story that goes necessarily beginning to ending. We get to the end, or what we think is the end. Jesus is dead, and it seems impossible that anything new could happen from that. And then we get Easter, this new life, this new moment that changes everything. Even as we get ready for Christmas, we have almost a story of an ending and a beginning. There's world that Jesus was born into is beginning to lose hope. The Jewish people were conquered by the Romans, and it didn't look like there was anything going on in terms of God intervening or doing what God had done in the past to save Israel. And then, as everything seems to be broken into that world, there's a baby that's born. And God had never done anything like that before. It was radical, and anybody who talked about Jesus as the Messiah was seen instantly as a heretic. God could never do that. God could never be human. God could never come that close to us. It was a radical and powerful thing, and that's what we're getting ready for now. We hear this story of the very end of times, of the world falling and crashing down around us. And out of that story, we're going to get a baby. We're going to get God who comes to us right where we are in the midst of that broken world and does something way more radical than tear it all down. That God would choose to get born into that world, to be a part of it, and to change the world through that story. It's an amazing and powerful thing. And so here we are, today, 2,000 years later, miles and miles away from where any of these stories ever started. And we hear the same words. We look out into a world that seems broken in so many ways, a world that's full of attacks and destruction and people shooting up folks all over the place. We hear time and time again of all of the ways the world is broken. And there are even those shouting out that God is coming back, that clearly Jesus is coming soon, that clearly the whole world is going to get torn down. But the really radical thing is that even if all of that happens, God is going to do something that no one ever expected. God is going to do something new in this world to build it up and to change it forever. I think God is doing just a little bit of that right now. As you prepare to go out this day, we go out into a world that is broken in so many ways, and yet, if you look closely, if you get a glimpse of the people around you, if you look in those places where you never think God could ever be, every once in a while, you get a glimpse of God at work. You get a glimpse of God doing something through the last person you ever expected. You get a glimpse of God at work maybe in your family, in your coworkers. You get a glimpse of God at work even through you. It might not last long. It might just be for an instant, but those glimpses, they change who we are. They add up again and again, and they change our lives, and we can never live the same way once we've gotten a taste of what God is doing. So as we get ready for Christmas and all of the crazy things that come with it, as we get ready for Jesus to come into the world, look around. Because in every ending, there's a new beginning. Will you pray with me? Oh, gracious God, come to us this day. In the midst of a world so broken and torn down, help us to see the places where you are at work. Help us to see the beginnings and the endings and the endings and beginnings. Help us to get a glimpse of you, maybe in the person or place we least expect. Help us to see you and send us out to do your work, to do something new in this world, something beyond anything we could imagine. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
World waits for a miracle. Heart longs for a little bit of hope. Oh, come, Emmanuel. Child prays for peace on earth.